Before we can spin up a cluster on Amazon's Elastic MapReduce, we need to set up our Amazon environment. Even if you're planning on only using the Spark EC2 script, then you'll still find the identity management and key pair setup useful. Now, to follow along, you'll first need to sign up for an AWS account from aws.amazon.com. I'll be doing the minimum required to get the cluster up and running. If you'd like to understand Amazon's web services in more depth, then Pluralsight has a number of AWS courses, especially Richard Seroter's AWS Developer Fundamentals, or Andrew Brust's Big Data on Amazon Web Services. Now, we first need to install the AWS Command Line Interface, or CLI. Its homepage has direct links for installation depending on your system, as well as a Getting Started link that will walk you through the installation and use in more details. I'll choose to simply download the 64-bit Windows installer and run through the installer using the defaults, which should automatically set the path variable so that you can use it from any command prompt. If it doesn't, then simply take note of where you install and manually add that to your path. Now we'll head to the AWS Management Console to set up an identity for our cluster. We do this in the Identity and Access Management section. In the User area, there we'll create a new user, which I'll name Spark Course, using the check for generating an access key for our user. This key information is needed to access AWS functions outside of this web management tool, like the EC2 script or the CLI. Next, we have to set up permissions for this identity to be enabled to perform the necessary operations to spin up our cluster. If you don't already have a policy built for this, then go to Create Group and click to create a specific policy for this user. We'll use the policy generator and set up this user to be allowed to access Amazon EC2. All actions for any resource, using the same broad permissions for Elastic MapReduce, or EMR, S3, and Identity and Access Management, or IAM. If this is too broad for you, then you can always play with these settings to figure out the minimum policy for managing a cluster. After setting a name, finish creating it, go back to the user group, refresh, and find and apply your new policy. Give the group a name in order to create it. Then use the defaults for the rest. Once created, we can show the credentials right here and/or download them as a CSV, as we'll do now. This is the only time they'll be available to you, but if you do misplace them, then you can generate new access keys from within the user's settings. These are your private keys and should not be shared with anybody else, unless you're willing to have them use services that could cost you money. Now that our identity is set up, we can supply the access keys we downloaded earlier to the CLI by using the AWS configure command. This takes the access key ID and its secret, as well as the default region to run against and default output. Once that's set up, then you can run the command AWS EMR create default roles, which will set up the default roles that'll be used when we create the cluster. The last piece of setup is for SSH ability. For this, head to the EC2 section and create an Ec2 Key Pair. However, you should first make sure that your console is pointing to the same region you set up in the CLI, as the key pair is region specific. We'll name our key pair Spark Course, and choose PPK, as that's the format PuTTY via Windows SSH supports. You can choose the format that best fits your SSH environment. Then we'll click Create, which results in a download of a Spark Course file. If you're using a non-Windows machine, then you'll need to change the permissions of this file so that you're the sole owner via the chmod command, specifying a mode of 400, and then passing in the key's path. Now, you're AWS ready.